Welcome to the stream. Today we have a great privilege of interviewing political activist, patriot, and filmmaker David Clements. Uh, we're going to interview him about his new film, Let My People Go, which is a powerful examination of the merits of the claims of election fraud for the presidential and other elections in 2020, and the legal persecution of election integrity activists from January 6th, and also other people who looked into the fraud and tried to stop the steal are now being subject to savage persecution through lawfare from the administrative state. So David, welcome, thank you. And everybody at the stream is really interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you, John. It's a pleasure.
As you saw, I wrote a column at the stream encouraging every American, especially Christians, to see Let My People Go, which is available everywhere. It's on Rumble. I think it might even, is it on YouTube, David?
It is, but it's flagged, so you won't see it as visible as other places because of an algorithm that suppresses it. There's a context label/sticker to make sure that you really have to be sure before you click on the film to watch it.
You have to get a parental note like those trips to the museum in grammar school. It's one of the most powerful political films I've seen in years, and that's why such an effort was made to suppress it. When I actually tried to pay for it, I got my credit card hijacked, and I had to have it deactivated. I think that's because you guys got debanked by all the mainstream institutions, so you had to try to get some offshore vendor or something. Anyway, it was a mess. When the flack starts really going around your plane, you know that you're over the target. So I'm glad you were able to make it free for everyone to see and encourage people to make it the most pirated film in the world. I know about it because of Steve Bannon's War Room, which is something else everybody at the stream ought to be watching every day. I'd like to start off by having you tell people your own story. At one point, you hadn't yet been canceled. You were a tenured professor teaching, minding your own business. When did everything change? What was the moment you realized something fundamentally wicked was happening in America on a grand scale? What did you do first? And what was the timeline of what was done to you to try to silence you?
Okay, just so people don't, claim that I'm, less than truthful, I have to put this caveat. I was on the tenure track, so I didn't even have the guarantees of having a position that was tenured at the university. So okay, so just so folks know that, John, for me, it wasn't an awakening that started with November 3rd, 2020. I think like many people, I've had a series of red pill moments over 20, 30 years. And I think I knew intuitively that the scale of corruption was much bigger than even I was willing to admit to. I mean, there's examples like Building 7, what happened there. But I had enough, I guess, a sense of self-preservation that I wasn't going to ruin a dinner party by talking about Building 7. My long paper thesis in law school was on the Federal Reserve and whether they had ever received a meaningful audit. And if you go down that rabbit trail, you'll never look at politics the same way when you're talking about people's issues with tax and spend policies, where we had over $8 trillion that we couldn't account for in 2008. Just mind blowing. It just destroys, I guess, the average Republican view of politics. And so each of those moments, I think, stirred in me this sense that we're missing something. And then in my professional career, I was a long-term prosecutor, and I saw corruption on the border. That's where I spent most of my career. And, when you have a lead task force agent that was a meth head sleeping with a cartel member's wife, you have judges coming in and out of chambers with white powder on their nose. When you hear about the revelations from Edward Snowden that we were using this program called PRISM, and I had to find out that many people on my task force were using an illegal tool, you disabuse yourself over whether or not the government can take on the role of a tyrant. And so it was kind of an evolution of almost having your heart broken. Like, here I am, I'm a prosecutor, putting on the white hat. And I'm seeing a lot of people that I share a profession with that aren't just people. And so I think that alerted me to what happened on November 3rd, 2020 in a way that I was more prepared for it. And then I think the last thing is that in 2013, 2014, I ran for office and I got to see the first iteration of Dominion being used. And I was up 14,000 votes in a US Senate race, only to see a flip and have no understanding as to why a vote flip took place. I was given an explanation that, well, we haven't counted the mail-in ballots yet. I'm like, okay, I guess I just don't have a clue on how this process works, but it stuck with me. And at some point, I migrated from being a prosecutor to a law professor at New Mexico State University, which is my alma mater. It's where my wife went. It's where her parents went. It's not Harvard, but it held a very, very special place for me. And when I saw the ramp up of the COVID-19 pretext, I just had a sense that I've never seen the government take power and give it back. And
Right.
I just knew this was going to be a long road to hoe. And I even commented to my department head that I had a sense that this was going to affect the elections. And I think the reason why I was tuned into the elections was at the university level, you already had this crazy DEI insanity that was going on that was causing people to kind of flog themselves if you're the wrong skin color, if you're a male. And I was very sensitive to that as someone who taught employment law, consumer protection, and then you had the jab. So you had this huge tapestry of wokeism that affected me directly. And I knew that there's the only way that I was going to survive at the university is if Donald Trump came in and through some form of executive order said, okay, we need to scale back on this critical race theory nonsense, or it wasn't an environment that I wanted to be in. And then November 3rd happened.
So what was the first thing that happened? I saw when I watched your wonderful film, it was something with you and your colleagues and administrators to do with COVID masking at the school. What happened at the school?
It was a little bit of everything. I think the first thing was the George Floyd incident. It's like everyone at the university got this memo that you need to tell everyone that you're racist. And so I look very, very liberal. If you just look at me, you wouldn't know that I'm right of Attila the Hun. But like, just look at me. I could get into committees and no one would think twice about it. So I signed up for the anti-racism task force and, all these things. I was just like undercover. And I heard the most atrocious things from my colleagues. Like, we can't hire that person. Yes, he's competent, but he's white, he's male. The other thing that happened was there was a monument that the school wanted to I guess, get ratified by the faculty senators that my university was founded upon institutional racism. And just to put that into context, I live in New Mexico. Hispanics are the majority. And our university was founded after the Civil War. And so I was the lone faculty senator out of, I think, 67. I said, I'm not going to sign off on this memorial. So that created a bullseye, because if I don't sign off on it, that means I must be pro-discrimination, pro-racism. And then after that, the Biden victory, the 81 million vote victory happened, and every single professor that was of a Marxist persuasion, which is most of them, basically hijacked our faculty listserv email service I guess whatever the name is, but it was called listserv. And we're just celebrating with glee. And the lack of civility was so great. And I had, the wherewithal to say, hey, could you all just keep it civil? None of us want to talk about politics here. I think I was even licking my own wounds, sitting there going, what does this mean? What am I going to do now with Biden at the helm? And when I asked for civility, the mob basically descended upon me. And it got worse. We all saw what occurred on January 6th. And then my university president put out a statement basically accusing all Trump supporters of being insurrectionists. And at that point, I just lost my stomach. And I put out a video, and it was meant for the staff for the most part, because I didn't have an idea whether or not stuff would go viral. I mean, it was beyond me. And it did go viral, and it got Tucker Carlson's attention and went on his show. And when that happened, the bullseye just got even bigger. So I had university professors filing complaints against me for committing microaggressions. Every month I had to do an Office of Institutional Equity like training because I'm, obviously too dangerous to be around. So there's a lot of things that were leading up to what was seen in the film, which was me not abiding by the jab and mask mandate. And one of the reasons why I wouldn't do that is that I taught consumer protection law. I mean, that was something that I had a subject matter expertise in. And I was dealing with the nonsense for a really, really long time. For about a calendar year, I think I was the first professor to demand to go back into the classroom and teach. And so it was a culmination of wokeism from this anti-racism, DEI stuff to the jab and the elections. And the elections, I think, was a bigger deal than the other two. Because I would go on Bannon's, I would go on War Room, and I would talk about my observations as a trial attorney, as someone who's well versed in evidence. And after I presented at the first cyber symposium, this was the big kind of amalgamation of experts at the time that showed up.
It's Mike Lindell's. Right?
Yeah, that Mike Lindell put on. I was introduced to a whole new audience. I had CNN cameras across the room. I mean, you had intelligence agencies that were represented there. You had spooks. It was probably the most unnerving place I'd ever been to. And that's saying something. I've done first-degree murder trials. But being at ground zero when it came to election integrity just created a whole host of other issues for me. And that's really, I think, what culminated with me being suspended, at least being targeted. They were looking for any reason to fire me.
Did they end up firing you from the university, or did you resign?
They did fire me. I wouldn't resign, but I was suspended for 2 months. And then there's an employment hearing that I actually put out online. And if people want to be thoroughly depressed, they can watch that. And then my bar license was attacked, and I've weathered 5 investigations. The 5th one's still pending. It's been over a year and a half, and it was actually the complaint was filed by a card-carrying witch, which may shock folks, but we took screenshots from this person's website, and she had tarot card readings for the demise and curse of my wife and children. And that, as insane as that sounds, the state bar of New Mexico took it up, and that's the case that's still pending.
Wow.
Where I have to tell people, hey, I could represent you. I'm in good standing, but I'm also under investigation. And so that's kind of a glimpse of what life has been like for me over the past 4 years.
So it's an example, a perfect example of lawfare, where anyone who pops his head up to speak out against the power grabs that are being justified in the name of George Floyd this week, Palestine next week, COVID this week, Ukraine that week. There's always a different pretext. I compared it to the Terminator in Terminator 2. It's liquid metal. It can change shape. It's Proteus. It can form any shape. It's going to try to kill you. It's trying to kill you whatever shape it takes. All right. So we just saw James Carville admit on a Twitter rant that the whole January 6th narrative was, in his words, spaghetti we threw at the wall and it didn't stick, unquote. And of course, we know the Americans rotting in prison for peacefully protesting on January 6th are human beings with souls, not strands of pasta. Can you point out to me maybe the one most compelling, tragic case of a January 6th prisoner who's still unjustly imprisoned?
I can't give you one case because every one of them affects me in a different way. Because there's some men like Ryan Samsel, who's got a strong physical constitution, and he's had the tar beaten out of him. They shattered his orbital bone. He's been awaiting trial for over 3 years. You could say, okay, is that the worst? You can look at Isaac Yoder, who dressed up as George Washington. He's featured in the film. And what's heartbreaking about that is his innocence. He carries with him a childlike innocence when he goes into the Capitol and he's praying. Is it the praying grandmother that went in? Is it Coy Griffin, who was the first county commissioner where the Insurrection Act was used against him to remove him from office when all he did was recite the Pledge of Allegiance and say a prayer? I mean, every one of the J6 stories is heartbreaking for a different reason. And I guess the reason why it's hard to tell you which one is, you kind of have to wonder who is feeling the internal anguish of their circumstances. Like Jake Lang is probably the most well-known J6er. He has an ability to get onto podcast. He gets punished for it. He doesn't care. And I don't worry about Jake because he's got such a strong faith. But you could say on paper, look, 3 years and counting, no trial. It's the story of the J6er that hasn't even been charged, that's committed suicide, I think would probably be the most heartbreaking example. And not everyone agrees on the number, but I think a total of 12 people have committed suicide. Not everyone's been booked and processed, but people, even now, you got a million families that are wondering, am I next? And so, yeah, all heartbreaking for different reasons.
Thank you. I'm an old friend of Sidney Powell. I got my large Twitter account permanently suspended, and all appeals still are being ignored, by writing a column of support of her for her in November 2020. She tried to make the case publicly about electronic voting machines and fraud in 2020. But I think the technical issues were so complex that it wasn't possible to persuade the public. The Dominion settlements were supposed to silence all discussion of the topic, and many of us moved on to the more easily explained phenomenon of ballot harvesting, the old-fashioned way, 2,000 mules. But your film brilliantly uses Jetson-style animation, narrative device of a game show, interviews with experts who use approachable language and metaphors to make it actually easy to understand. And you reminded us all of what we saw with our own lying eyes. Donald Trump losing votes and Biden gaining them in real time on TV. Please talk about how you approach the electronic fraud phenomenon.
Well, I think I approached it as someone who is not into math. I'm not into science. I'm an attorney by trade, but I've done enough closing arguments in jury trials that if I lost a case, it wasn't the jury's fault. It was my fault for not distilling something that might be infinitely complex in a way that they can understand. And I would agonize over the types of analogies we would use in the film. So, I mean, think about how difficult it is to put on a documentary, one that's depressing, but will capture someone's attention, not leave, when you're talking about PID controlled algorithms and, Trump to Biden ratios. I mean, we knew we had to get your heartstrings with respect to the J6ers, and then make the math and science stuff approachable. So I think that's where I was coming from, is how do I not lose people when this is so overwhelming? And I think we by and large succeeded on that. With Sydney, I still get really upset with the way that people treat her because they have to understand that she put together those lawsuits in about 3 weeks. And while we can look back and say, okay, not everything is 100% accurate, the fact that about 95% of it still holds up, when there's no legal requirement that you have to be 100% spot on, these are supposed to be claims that you plead in good faith, that the media has gone after her, and you basically had someone with a gold star career. Just, it bothers me to this day. And so I think so many people have said, okay, Sydney, when are you going to release the crack? And she did. There are 4 lawsuits that I personally evaluated that were just insanely detailed, and for the most part, absolutely right. And so I don't think it was so much about the burden of the complexity. It was that there was a corruption issue. No one wanted to give her a chance to actually look at her cases and have full-blown merits hearings. So if you actually look at the court logs in Sidney Powell's cases and other cases that were filed, they didn't set merits hearings. In Sydney's in particular, they set it for 1 hour. So one of her complaints alone, I think, was about 400 pages total. You had 22 exhibits. You couldn't read her complaint in an hour, let alone have a meaningful evidentiary hearing. So I just want to, defend Sydney here and now, especially if she's a good friend of yours, that this game was rigged from the get-go. And we're not here because the attorneys didn't somehow grasp with the most approachable legal theory, or we didn't present the right pile of fraud. We were up against a DOJ that was weaponized against us, against Bill Barr, who told people to shut it down, and a censorship regime. And this was really explained well by Mike Benz when he was with Tucker Carlson, that you had 22 million posts leading up to the 2020 election that were purged on Twitter alone if you negatively talked about the vote tabulation machines, mail-in ballots, and early voting. So I think what Team Evil was looking for, John, was to get over it. Like March of 2021, just get over it, get used to the feed that we're giving you, and have a short memory. But the election was so devastating, it was so jarring that people just could not let it go. And the truth, thank God, has affirmed the position of the election denier to the point where the vast majority of Americans are on the same page as you and I.
That's right. With every medium, including Fox News, drilling into our heads that this election was the freest and fairest and most secure in history. The percentage of Americans who know it was rigged has risen by the year, only through scrappy little things like War Room and your videos and people on Rumble and people on Truth Social, because the whole game was rigged against us. I compare America today to Poland in 1980 with the communist regime, but solidarity is pushing back.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think Trump is position of Lech Walesa. He's not perfect, but he's all we have, and he's solid and he's fighting. All right, just a couple more questions. With the economy tanking and pro-Hamas mobs storming campuses and attacking the Jewish student centers, and the lawfare attacks on Trump apparently backfired, it looks more and more as if the left will be forced to blatantly steal the next presidential election or accept defeat, which is they will not accept. My friend and former colleague Rachel Alexander just published a column on what each of us can do to help fight vote fraud, and we reprinted it at the Street. Apart from getting everyone to watch Let My People Go, what would you ask stream readers to do this time to help prevent a replay of the 2029?
Well, there's two divergent views in conservative camps. One is, let's embrace early voting. Let's beat the Democrats at their own game.
Ballot harvesting.
Ballot chasing, ballot harvesting. And I have zero patience for that. I think it's the absolutely wrong prescription. And those are the very things, by the way, that would lead to you being censored and deplatformed. So I don't think we should ever embrace a prescription that is approved by the intelligence agencies that stole the election. What I have to preface with your audience is that you're not going up against Democrat voters. You're not. This is not a shoe leather campaign of traditional fundraising. Let me scour more waste baskets at a dorm room or at a nursing home, and that's how we win if we're Democrats. You're up against software. You're up against a keystroke. And until people can understand that, unless you've got something that helps you close down open systems, you're not going to win. And that doesn't mean that you can't overwhelm things to a degree and make the cracks more visible. So understanding the computers the way that I do, I would say vote in person. If you receive a ballot, take it with you, and remove data points from the bad guys, making it harder for them to deploy those algorithms. So the more that you can hold on to your stack of cards, if you will, and not show them your hand, the better it is for the American people. And then to try to improve the terrain. This is something that we don't talk about enough. Is we always think about voting season or voting election day. We don't talk about what we can do now. And most of my work is about improving the terrain to get to victories where we remove rigged architecture. So Shasta County, California, defunded Dominion. They're not using Dominion. You got 15 precincts in Alaska and outside of Wasilla that aren't using Dominion. You've got the city of Milton in Georgia not using Dominion. You have 2 counties in Nevada not using ES&S. And those counties will have a greater degree of confidence in their elections because of the simple steps of removing rigged architecture.
Should Republican governors be acting to remove Dominion in their states? Should we be pressuring our governors to do that?
Well, the pressure really should come in every which way. But what I've been focusing on is you're not going to persuade an entire Republican legislature who really has the purview here. I mean, even John East would tell you that it's the legislature that sets the time, place, and manner for elections. And they don't follow the law anyway. In 2020, under the COVID pretext, they basically threw the law away and said, hey, everyone, I know you only have a 99.98% chance of surviving, but vote by mail. So they had laws on the books. They didn't follow them. And there's a vested interest. People don't understand that while we've got 80% of the Republican Party that agrees with you, John, and me that we've got a flawed system, that 80% does not track over to our representative class. It doesn't track with the governors. And it's simple to understand why. They've got a vested interest to not disturb the architecture that let them through, one way or the other. And you've got judges that don't want to hear these cases because they appeared on ballots through retention elections. And so the potential to upset the apple cart, let me just say, I know what I'm telling people. It's devastating to the deep state if we got rid of the machines. You would have honest elections. And so for me, I have to make the problem small and approachable. And the way that I do that is I look to the election administrator in the county that certifies that machine. They and they alone will sign a piece of paper saying that this product is not defective. It's worthy of my certification. In other words, it's trustworthy. And they alone should be held responsible for that certification. Likewise, you've got canvassing boards. These are usually your county commissions. They and they alone certify the vote totals in a local election. And at some point, it's all amalgamated and the SOS gives you a rubber stamp. But what we need are 3,000 counties where the local officials actually understand what certification is and isn't. And they should not be rubber stamping something that they have no clue, number one, how the architecture works. None of these clerks understand these machines. None of them have seen the source code. None of them have examined the cast vote record summaries. None of them know if they're Bluetooth enabled. None of them really know, just the myriad of ways that we explain in the film. And so why is it that an unemployed professor knows more about their systems than they do? Yet they're the ones that are certifying the votes of Texas and New Mexico and elsewhere. So I've been trying to do a public awareness campaign where we have 3,147 battlefields. These are counties. And we approach not an entire legislature, a governor. We don't chalk our fate up to an unaccountable judge who's going to dismiss our case in the first place. We say, look, that certification that you're about to sign off on, it means something. And what would happen if you actually did the right thing and said, no, I am not going to certify this black box until I have a perfect understanding of whether or not this machine can be subverted. And if they follow the evidence, they have no business certifying. So my efforts are a little bit different than the lawsuits that are filed. I think there needs to be a combination of the brave souls that are filing lawsuits, trying to get to the Supreme Court. But there needs to be a groundswell of anger, righteous anger, where people have said, I've had enough. And I think I'm right, John, because no matter where you look, whether it's Mark Fincham and Carrie Lake, who had a lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court, they didn't hear it. The Supreme Court is yet to take up any of these cases. And I think it's gonna take a very, very angry MAGA army saying, look, we've had enough. We got to go back to this time, I call it the magical time of the 1980s, where everything was closed down. You go to a garage, you sign a paper poll book, you get your ballot. You had paper bean counters where everyone was tabulating things through hash marks at a table. You had Democrats and Republicans that didn't trust each other. And it worked. And that's what we need. And the good news is that there's no statute of limitations for doing the right thing and pouring the right foundation. So this isn't really about 2024 for me. I know that might sound weird, but even if we get Trump in, I want more than a 4-year term of sanity. I want something that generationally will serve my daughter and my son over the next 70 years.
Right. Thank you. Just finally, could you talk a little bit about your walk of faith and how your relationship with God has sustained you in this Herculean struggle to clean out the Augean stables?
Yeah, it's everything for me, John. I don't think people can fathom that, or I still have a hard time processing what my family's been through. And what I mean to say is that you had the intelligence agencies rig an election. The election infrastructure is a creature of the Department of Homeland Security, which hates us. And the fact that I happened to stumble across the truth and distill things made me someone that they wanted to destroy. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. This was Reuters. Reuters deployed a 9-person team that followed me across state lines. Andrew Marshall was one of the lead writers. I think he was nominated for a Pulitzer. he would go to war-torn areas. So this is a guy they would send to create a narrative on whether we should bomb and kill people and make you, as the general population, agree with that narrative. They sent him to paint a picture of me that basically reads like an obituary. So I bring this up from a faith standpoint, that the only way that you can weather that kind of concerted action to destroy everything that you've worked your entire life for. I mean, it's hard to express this to people. I mean, I was not in politics prior to 2020. I did not have a podcast. I was not writing. I was, I'm just a dad with 3 small children. And Providence, what have you, placed me in a place where I was more afraid of being judged by history than my colleagues at the university. It's as simple as that. And I just felt like on January 6th in particular, I was given a supernatural revelation. It's a small, still voice saying, you've got to do this. And then I would do it. And then a day later, small, still voice, do this. And I've been trying to practice my faith in a sense of daily walks of obedience. Everyone wants to save the country. Everyone wants to, be the hero of the story. And I find that God will only use those that will do the kind of the humble, dirty work day in and day out. And so I'm trying to create tape. And that means every day, no matter how unglorious it looks like for me and my family, Lord, what would you have me do today? And the beauty of it, John, is that he's met me. He's strengthened my faith. He's strengthened the faith of my wife, and our children have been blessed. And we've been supernaturally preserved. I cannot tell you why it is that other people have been arrested. John Eastman had to turn himself in Phoenix just this past week. Why Stephanie Lambert was arrested in a courtroom in Washington, D.C. Why Peter Benegger, who's featured in the film, was arrested for investigating Wisconsin. I mean, we're getting picked off one by one. And thus far, I've been able to share the stories of the J6 families and the best election experts on planet Earth. And I believe that God has basically set me aside for this role. That might change. So yeah, my faith walk has never been sweeter. But that doesn't mean there aren't days where I'm sitting there going, I want off of the treadmill.
Thank you so much, David. But please tell our viewers and readers where they can go what's the best place to go to follow you and to find your film. We're going to show the trailer at the end of this for the film, Let My People Go. But where should people go to follow you? Yeah,
you can find all of my social media handles at theprofessorsrecord.com. Just go to the very bottom and you can find me on Twitter, True Social, and all the other places.
Thank you so much. God bless and keep you strong. And now we're going to conclude this with the trailer for David's film, Let My People Go. God bless.
There's still a disconnect with most Americans that don't associate what happened on November 3rd, 2020 with January 6th. But the reality is everyone that's rotting in there right now is in there because of what happened on November 3rd.
Did you have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol on January the 6th prior to the doors being open?
Again, I had to be very careful.
It should be a no.
But how do you change that government when our politicians are selected rather than elected? When everyone is too scared to talk about the slave master that made it all possible.
It's an act of psychological warfare that you do to prisoners of war. We didn't know where we were going, why they were moving us.
So while the J6ers wear real chains, we continue to wear invisible ones. Oh, how I dream of breaking through the feed that keeps us asleep.
What I'm saying is nobody's following the federal law, including the vendors.
In China in particular, they advance persistent threats. Some of them are massive organizations, larger than many U.S. defense organizations.
You're talking about advanced persistent threat level players.
On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most difficult, how easy is it to hack into these systems?
Can I go to a 0.5 instead of a 1?
Across the country, when you've got systems that are in use in these elections and you can't look at them, it's beyond belief. Absolutely. It was stolen because it never should have been certified.
In the simplest of terms,
We use proprietary machines that use programs to steal, shuffle, dilute, and plunder our most valuable property interest, our votes.
If Donald Trump's providential, aren't you providential? Ask yourself why you're here.
We are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
You cannot say that this went well. Those are lost votes.
There's something wrong with our system. I hold you with the tips.
Today, I am here to overturn the money changers' table.
This is a battle of good and evil, and there will come a day when you will sit before a higher judge.
Not only will we win, but I will spend the rest of whatever years I have on this earth with my wife, with my children, praising God. And I'll encourage them and admonish them, you better keep this alive. Keep the memory alive. Because I don't want to go back to hell.